They say blood is thicker than water. The real question is what happens when the blood was never yours to begin with. My name is Robert Enfield, and I was 61 years old a Sunday afternoon. My parents sat me down in their living room on Sycamore Hill Drive and told me I had been adopted at birth. The room smelled of old upholstery and my mother's gardenia hand lotion, the same lotion she kept on the end table since before I could remember. The afternoon light came through the lace curtains in pale strips across the carpet. My hands went still in my lap. Neither of them knew what I had locked in my attorney's safe in downtown Portland since the spring of 1987. Welcome back to Channel, where quiet choices make the loudest statements. If you've ever built your entire life on a foundation you were never told the truth about, this story is for you. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. Robert Enfield, the name they gave me, still mine. I was born, as I understood it for 6 decades, on March 4th, 1962, in Portland, Oregon, the only child of Frank Enfield and Lorraine Enfield, née Hadley. Frank spent his career as a purchasing manager for a mid-sized paper mill in Milwaukee, Oregon, a man of measured words and careful habits, who wore the same style of Oxford shirt in rotating colors for 40 years, and considered strong opinions a form of poor discipline. Lorraine taught 3rd grade at Eastview Elementary School on Powell Boulevard from 1965 until her retirement in 1997, and she brought the same organized patience to the household that she brought to her classroom. Everything labeled, everything filed, everything in its designated place. I grew up on Sycamore Hill Drive in southeast Portland in a house that Frank and Lorraine had purchased in 1961, a year before I arrived. The house was a single-story Craftsman with a covered porch, a basement full of Frank's woodworking equipment, and a backyard that Lorraine kept in a state of seasonal discipline. Tulips in spring, roses in summer, a vegetable garden along the south fence that produced more zucchini than any household of 3 could reasonably consume. I knew every board of that porch. I knew the particular creak of the 3rd step on the basement stairs and the way the kitchen window stuck in humid weather and had to be lifted from the left. I attended Portland State University on a partial academic scholarship, graduating in May of 1984 with a degree in business administration. I went to work that summer for Cascadia Property Management on SW Broadway in downtown Portland, managing commercial leasing accounts, and I stayed for 36 years. By 1998, I was a senior account manager. By 2007, I was a regional director overseeing a portfolio of 42 commercial properties across the Pacific Northwest. Frank and Lorraine came to exactly one work event in 36 years, a company anniversary dinner in 2003, at which my father spent most of the evening talking to a man he recognized from a woodworking supply store. My wife, Eleanor Enfield née Castillo, was the person who understood my family with the clarity that only comes from standing slightly outside a thing and looking at it plainly. We met in 1986 at a property management conference in Seattle and married in September of 1988 at a small ceremony at Portland's Hoyt Arboretum. Beneath the Douglas firs Eleanor had specifically requested because she said she wanted the ceremony to happen somewhere that had been standing longer than our problems. She was right about most things. She was right about that, too. Eleanor noticed a pattern in the first year. She saw the way my father's conversations about my career always curved back to what things cost rather than what they were worth. She saw the way my mother praised my accomplishments the way you praise a house guest, warmly, briefly, and without particular investment in the outcome. She said nothing about it for a long time, because she was that kind of person, the kind who waits until the right moment. But in the spring of 1987, after a Sunday dinner on Sycamore Hill Drive during which my father had spent 40 minutes explaining why Frank's nephew Gerald's new contracting business was more interesting than commercial property management, Eleanor had driven us home on Powell Boulevard in silence, and then parked in the driveway on Alder Creek Lane and said, quietly, "Robert, I think there's something you don't know about your family." That was how it started. The document was in a safe at the office of my attorney, Marcus Webb, a family law and estate attorney at Webb & Callahan LLP on SW Fifth Avenue in Portland. I had brought it there myself on April 14th, 1987 at 10:30 a.m., the morning after Eleanor had said what she said in the driveway on Alder Creek Lane. Marcus Webb had looked at it for a long time without speaking, and then he had looked at me, and then he had said, "Robert, "Do you understand what this is?" I said, "I think I'm beginning to." He said, "This doesn't expire. Whenever you need it, it will be here." I said, "I know." He locked it in his safe. I drove home. I did not tell Eleanor what it contained, because I was not yet sure I understood it myself. And because there are things you carry alone until you know what shape they are. Eleanor died on October 7th, 2017, from a cardiac event she had not known was coming. She was 54 years old. Her cardiologist, Dr. James Arriaga, a cardiovascular specialist at Oregon Health and Science University on Southwest Sam Jackson Park Road, had cleared her at her most recent annual exam on February 23rd of that year and found no indication of concern. He called me at 2:14 p.m. on a Saturday and told me Eleanor had collapsed at a farmer's market on Southeast Division Street at approximately 1:47 p.m. and had not been revived. I was in the backyard on Alder Creek Lane. When the call came, the roses Eleanor had planted along the back fence were still in their last October bloom. Small, stubborn, the color of dried brick. I had driven Lorraine to her weekly physical therapy appointments at Providence Medical Center on Northeast Glisson Street every Thursday morning for 2 years, from January 2015 through December 2016, when her hip replacement recovery required consistent attendance. I left the house on Alder Creek Lane at 7:45 a.m. each Thursday, collected Lorraine from Sycamore Hill Drive at 8:10 a.m., waited in the physical therapy reception for 50 minutes, and drove her home by 10 a.m. I did this 89 times. I kept a mileage log. I paid the property taxes on the Sycamore Hill Drive house for 4 consecutive years, from 2016 through 2019, because Frank's fixed pension had been strained by a series of home repair costs, and he had mentioned at a Sunday dinner in October 2015 that the tax bill was becoming a problem. I said I would handle it. I paid it the next morning. I paid it every year after that without being asked again. The annual amount was $2,314. For years, $9,256. I kept every receipt. I replaced a water heater at Sycamore Hill Drive in March of 2018, a full system replacement through a licensed plumber named Gene Kirby at Cascade Plumbing on Southeast Foster Road at a cost of $1,840, because Frank had called on a Tuesday evening to say the unit had failed and the basement floor was wet. I arranged a service call for following morning at 8 a.m. I paid the invoice by end of day. The document in Marcus Webb's safe had been there for 34 years by the time my parents sat me down on Sycamore Hill Drive. I had checked in with Marcus every few years, not because I expected to use it, but because I believed in knowing where things were. He had retired in 2019 and transferred the file to his partner, a younger attorney named Diana Cho at Webb and Callahan LLP, with a note attached that read, "Robert Enfield, hold indefinitely at client instruction. Do not destroy." Diana Cho had called me in January of 2020 to introduce herself and confirm the arrangement. I said, "Yes, keep it exactly where it is." She said, "Understood." I said, "You'll know when I call." The conversation on Sycamore Hill Drive happened on a Sunday in September of 2023. I had driven over that morning at 10:30 a.m. for what my mother had described on the phone as a family lunch. The house smelled of pot roast and old wood and something chemical from the cleaning product Frank used on the kitchen floor every Saturday. The roses in the front yard had been cut back for the season. The porch boards creaked the way they always had. I had not brought anything because she had said not to. Frank was sitting in his chair by the window when I came in. Lorraine was at the kitchen table with her hands folded. Neither of them was eating anything. There was no pot roast. There was nothing on the stove. The kitchen smelled of coffee that had been made a long time ago and had gone cold. My stomach dropped before either of them spoke. I sat across from my mother at the kitchen table. The afternoon light from the window above the sink was flat and gray, the particular gray of a September morning in Portland that has not decided whether to rain. My mother said, "We need to tell you something." I said, "All right." She looked at my father. He was looking at the window. "You were adopted," she said, "at birth. We have never told you. We decided, a long time ago, that it was better for you not to know." I said nothing. My hands were on the table in front of me. They were completely still. "We're telling you now," she said, "because we're getting older and things will need to be handled. We thought you should know before it's too late." My father turned from the window and said, "You were never really ours. We want you to understand that this doesn't change anything." Something in me settled like sediment, like something that had been suspended for a long time, finally reaching the bottom. I said nothing for what must have been 30 seconds. Neither of them spoke. "How long have you known I was looking for this information?" I said. My mother's face went through something I could not name. "We didn't know you were looking," she said. "I've known since 1987. I said. The room was quiet. The old clock on the kitchen wall made it sound. The refrigerator made it sound. Frank looked at me and then looked at the table. "You knew," my mother said. It was not a question. "I found the original hospital intake document in your filing cabinet," I said. "In March of 1987. I was looking for the car insurance renewal. I found something else." My father's hands were on his knees. He did not move them. "I photocopied it," I said. "I brought the copy to my attorney the next morning. It has been in his safe, and then his partner's safe, since April 14th, 1987. The clock on the kitchen wall kept going. The refrigerator kept going. "Why didn't you say anything?" my mother said. "I was waiting to understand what it meant," I said. "And then I was waiting to understand why you hadn't told me. And then some time passed, and I was waiting because the timing wasn't right. And then Eleanor died, and then more time passed." My mother looked at her hands. My father looked at the window again. "We thought you'd be upset," she said. I nodded once. I looked at the cold coffee on the counter. Over the following weeks, the nature of the conversation shifted. My father called in October to tell me they had spoken with their estate attorney, a man named Gordon Price at Price Family Law on S.W. Barber Boulevard, and that the will had been reviewed and was, as he put it, in order. "We want you to know that you're in it," my father said. The October light on Alder Creek Lane was orange and low, the maple in the backyard going gold at the edges. "We haven't excluded you. We want to be clear about that." I said, "Thank you, Dad. But Gordon has advised us," he said, "that given the adoption status, the biological question, there may be some complexity. We want to make sure everything is handled correctly." My throat tightened. I kept my voice steady. "Complexity how?" I said. "Gordon feels it would be cleaner," my father said, "to clarify the legal relationship before anything proceeds." I said, "I understand." I did not say anything further. I let that sit between us on the phone line for a moment. What Gordon Price did not know, what neither Frank nor Lorraine had thought to ask, was whether the document in Diana Cho's safe had any bearing on the question of legal relationship. And what they could not have known, because I had never told anyone, was what that document actually was. I had found the hospital intake record, yes, but I had also found, tucked behind in the same folder in Frank's filing cabinet, a second document, a notarized adoption agreement dated March 7th, 1962, signed by both Frank Enfield and Lorraine Enfield, in which they had agreed, in exchange of placement of a male infant, to a set of conditions established by the adoption agency. One of those conditions, written in the plain legal language of a 1962 Oregon family court filing, was that the adoptive parents would provide for the child's education, welfare, and material support to the same standard as a biological child, and that any estate or inheritance would be distributed without distinction of biological origin. The agreement had been notarized. It had been filed with Multnomah County Family Court. It was a legal instrument. It had been sitting in Marcus Webb's safe and then Diana Cho's safe since April 14th, 1987. My father's call in October was not the last. In November, Lorraine called to tell me that Gordon Price had recommended a formal legal clarification of my status as an heir, just to make sure everyone is protected, she said. The kitchen on Alder Creek Lane was cold that morning. The heating slowed to respond to the November temperature. The window above the sink was fogged at the edges. I made coffee while she talked. "We're not trying to hurt you," she said. "We want this to be fair." "Fair," I said. "Gordon says that without clarification," she said. "There could be challenges later. From anyone." I said, "I understand. "We love you," she said. "You know that." "I know," I said. I kept my face still. I said goodbye. I poured the coffee down the sink because it had gone cold while she was talking. My second named professional entered the picture that same week. I called Diana Cho at Webb & Callahan LLP on November 8, 2023 at 9:17 a.m. I told her I was ready. She said she had been expecting the call. I said I would come in Thursday. She said she would have everything prepared. I drove to Sycamore Hill Drive on the following Sunday and helped my father replace 2 boards on the front porch that had softened over the summer and become a trip hazard. I brought the lumber myself, cut to length at the hardware store on Hawthorne Boulevard. I spent 2 hours on that porch with a pry bar and a drill and a box of exterior screws. My father brought me a glass of water at noon. We did not talk about the will or Gordon Price or the adoption or any of it. We talked about the wood and the weather and the particular difficulty of matching the stain on old porch boards. I drove home at 2:30 p.m. I put my tools in the garage. I washed my hands at the kitchen sink on Alder Creek Lane. The maple in the backyard had gone fully gold and some leaves had already come down. I called Diana Cho at 3:15 p.m. and told her to proceed. I sat at the kitchen table on Alder Creek Lane at 9 p.m. on a Sunday in November of 2023, with the overhead light on and a cup of coffee that I was actually going to drink this time, and I thought about 36 years. The house was quiet the way houses are quiet when the person who made them feel inhabited is no longer in them. Eleanor had made this house, not in the construction sense. We had bought it together in 1991 from a retired couple who kept it meticulously, but in the sense that she had known which drawer the flashlight went in and which plants needed water on which days and what the neighborhood sounded like at 2 in the morning when everything was fine. She had made the house feel like it was aware of us. Without her, it was just a building that knew my routines. I thought about the filing cabinet on Sycamore Hill Drive, the smell of the basement that March afternoon in 1987, the particular combination of cedar and machine oil and old paper that meant I was in Frank's domain. The organized rows of labeled folders that Lorraine had established and Frank had never deviated from. I had gone down there for the car insurance renewal because Frank had asked me to find it. He was upstairs with a pulled shoulder and the stairs were difficult. I had found the insurance folder. And then behind it, because the folders were packed tight and the insurance folder had been reshuffled forward out of alphabetical order at some point, I had seen another folder labeled in Lorraine's handwriting. R.E. Original Documents. I had opened it because my initials were on it, and I did not know what was in it. I had stood in that basement under the fluorescent light for 11 minutes, reading 2 documents I had never known existed. Then I had put them back. Then I had taken them out again. Then I had carefully, at the copy machine in the Cascadia Property Management Office, the next morning at 7:48 a.m., made copies of both pages. Then I had brought them to Marcus Webb. I had never confronted Frank and Lorraine. Not in 1987, when I was 25 and the Discovery was still alive, current running through everything. Not in 1990, when I married Eleanor and stood beside her at the Hoyt Arboretum and thought about it briefly and then set it aside. Not in 2003 or 2009 or 2015. I had waited because I had not yet decided what waiting was for, and because I suspected that the decision about when to use a document was itself a form of the document's power, that as long as I held it quietly, I held something. Frank and Lorraine had spent 61 years believing I did not know. They had made their estate decisions on the basis of that belief. Gordon Price had advised them on the basis of that belief. Every conversation about complexity and clarification and fairness had been conducted in the assumption that the adoptee was in the dark. The table under my hands was solid. The overhead light was steady. Outside, the November wind moved to the maple in the backyard. A few more leaves came down. I thought about Eleanor saying, in the driveway on Alder Creek Lane in 1987, "I think there's something you don't know about your family." She had been right. In the way she was always right. Not completely right, but more right than anyone else in the room. What she had not known, because I had not yet told her, was that by the time she said it, I had already found the folder. What I had not yet understood, in 1987, was that the folder was not the end of something. It was the beginning of a patience I would need to hold for 36 years. I finished the coffee. I rinsed the cup. I turned off the kitchen light. On Monday morning at 8:47 a.m., I called Diana Cho's office and confirmed the Thursday appointment. Her assistant, a young woman named Sandra, confirmed the time and told me to bring the original photographs I had mentioned. I said I would. I had one more thing to do before Thursday. I called the county assessor's office on Tuesday morning at 9:05 a.m. and requested a certified copy of the current assessed value of the property at Sycamore Hill Drive. It was a routine request. The assessor's office processed it in 48 hours. I picked it up on Wednesday afternoon. I also continued to pay the bi-monthly landscaping service I had arranged for Sycamore Hill Drive in the spring of 2021, a crew from Greenway Property Services on S.E. Powell Boulevard, at $220 per visit. I had set it up after Frank's knees made the mowing impossible, and Lorraine had mentioned the yard was getting difficult to manage. 6 visits remaining in the calendar year. I paid the November invoice on Wednesday, the same day I picked up the assessor's documents. $140, the prorated final visit. I paid it because that was what I did, and because the decision I had made had nothing to do with the lawn. Gordon Price filed a legal clarification request with Multnomah County Family Court on November 14, 2023, at 11:30 a.m. Diana Cho received the filing notification at 1:09 p.m. that same day. She called me at 1:22 p.m. "They've filed," she said. "I know," I said. "I expected it this week." "Thursday is still the plan?" "Thursday," I said. The week that followed had a particular texture to it. Frank called on Wednesday evening to tell me the process was underway and that Gordon Price was confident it would be resolved cleanly. He said it in the tone he had always used for matters he considered administrative, measured, informational, stripped of the emotional content that was present anyway, but that he preferred not to acknowledge. "It's just paperwork," he said. "Gordon says it's straightforward." "I'm sure it is," I said. My chest was steady. My hands, on the kitchen counter on Alder Creek Lane, did not move. "I want you to know," he said, "that we are not doing this to hurt you. We are doing this to protect, to make sure things are clear." "I understand, Dad," I said. He said, Good. I said nothing further. I let him finish. I said goodbye. I had told no one what the document was. Not Diana Cho, not the full contents. Only that it existed, and that I had carried a copy since 1987, and that it was a notarized legal instrument filed with Multnomah County. She had not pressed me for more detail. She had simply said, the first time I described it in June of 2020 after she had called to introduce herself, "Robert, when you're ready to tell me what's in it, tell me. Until then, I'll keep it exactly where it is." I had told her the full contents on November 8th on the phone after 36 years. She had been quiet for a moment. Then she said, "And this was filed with the county in 1962? March 7th. I said, "It predates my birth by 3 days. "Robert," she said, "Gordon Price is going to have a very difficult Thursday." What the clarification request had done, what Gordon Price's filing had inadvertently done, was formally open a question of my legal relationship to Frank and Evelyn Enfield as heirs. The question, once open in family court, required the court to examine the existing record. The existing record included, filed with Multnomah County Family Court in March of 1962, a notarized adoption agreement that contained explicit language about inheritance without distinction of biological origin. Gordon Price had not found that agreement because he had not looked for it, because Frank and Lorraine had not told it existed, because Frank and Lorraine had forgotten it existed, or had chosen to believe that a 61-year-old document could be quietly set aside. Diana Cho's third professional action entered the record on Thursday, November 16th, 2023. Her name was Rachel Odom, a family court specialist at the Multnomah County Clerk's Office, who formally certified the 1962 adoption agreement as a valid existing instrument at 9:44 a.m. in response to Diana Cho's request for record authentication filed the previous Tuesday. I was in Diana's office on SW Fifth Avenue when the certification email arrived. Diana read it. She turned her laptop to show me. The document header said, Multnomah County Family Court, Certified Instrument, Enfield Adoption Agreement, filed March 7, 1962. My breath held for one moment. Then I let it go. That's it, Diana said. Yes, I said. She sent a certified copy to Gordon Price's office at 10:02 a.m. His paralegal signed the receipt at 10:09 a.m. Frank called me at 11:34 a.m. His voice, when I answered, was a sound I had not heard from him before, not angry, not cold, but stripped of the administered calm he had maintained for 60 years. Something underneath it was showing. Thomas sent me something, he said. He meant Gordon Price. From Diana Cho. I said, I know. There's a document, he said. Yes, I said. There is. From 1962, he said. March 7th, I said. 3 days before I was born. There was a silence on the line. I heard him breathing. You've had this, he said, since April 14th, 1987. I said, the morning after Eleanor told me she thought there was something I didn't know about my family. She was right. There were two things. He did not speak for a long time. I did not fill the silence. Outside Diana Cho's window on Southwest Fifth Avenue, Portland was doing what Portland does in November. Gray sky, wet pavement. People moving under umbrellas. The ordinary traffic of a Thursday morning. Why didn't you say something? He said. I had thought about how to answer that question since 1987. Because I needed to know first. I said, whether you would tell me yourself. Diana Cho's office on SW Fifth Avenue had one window that looked west toward the West Hills. On that Thursday morning in November, the hills were wrapped in low cloud, the Douglas firs invisible above the tree line. The heating in the building made a faint sound, a steady mechanical hum that was easy to forget until the room went quiet. Frank called my cell phone. Then he called again. Then a third time. I let the first two ring. I answered the third at 11:34 a.m., sitting in the chair across from Diana Cho's desk. The conversation had ended. The part where Frank asked why I had not said anything. The part where I had told him because I needed to know whether he would tell me himself. And what was left was a quieter, harder part. The part where the accounting was real. Gordon says, Frank said, that the document, that it supersedes a clarification filing. I said, yes. He says it's binding, he said, that it was filed with the county. It was filed with the county on March 7th, 1962. I said, Diana Cho can send you the certification. She already did, he said. His voice was very flat. I said nothing. I kept my eyes on the window, the cloud on the hills. Lorraine is... She wants to talk to you, he said. Not today, I said. Tell her I'll call this week. He said, Robert. I said, Dad. There was a long pause. The heating made it sound. Diana Cho sat across from me, with her pen resting on the desk. We thought we were doing the right thing, he said. In 1962, we thought keeping it. We thought it would be easier. I know, I said. I've thought about that for a long time. Are you going to? He stopped. I'm not going to do anything except what's already been set in motion, I said. The document exists. It's certified. Gordon knows what it says. That's all. He was quiet again. You paid our taxes, he said. You drove your mother to therapy. You fixed the porch. Yes, I said. You knew the whole time. I knew the whole time, I said. His hands, I was told later by Lorraine, were shaking when he set the phone down. She had been in the room. She had gone pale the way people go pale when something they thought was a private arrangement turns out to have been witnessed for 36 years. I thanked Diana Cho. I put on my coat. I took the elevator down to SW Fifth Avenue and walked 2 blocks to the parking garage on SW Morrison. I found my car on the 3rd level. I drove home to Alder Creek Lane on Powell Boulevard with the radio off, the way I always did when I needed the drive to be enough on its own. I got home at 12:41 p.m. I went inside. I made a sandwich. I ate it at the kitchen table. The maple in the backyard was down to its last few leaves. The roses Eleanor had planted along the back fence were cut back for winter, just the canes, bare and dark against the fence boards. I washed my plate. I put it in the rack. I went back to the desk. Gordon Price withdrew the clarification filing on November 21st, 2023, 5 days after Diana Cho's certification arrived. He did not contest the 1962 document. Diana Cho called me that afternoon at 3:47 p.m. to confirm. I was raking leaves in the backyard on Alder Creek Lane when my phone rang. I answered it with one hand, the rake in the other. "It's done," she said. "Thank you, Diana." I said. "Robert," she said. "You held that for 36 years. I had good help," I said. I meant Eleanor. Diana understood that. The estate was not immediately resolved. Frank and Lorraine were still living, and the will would remain the will until circumstances required otherwise. What had changed was the legal record. The 1962 adoption agreement, now formally certified and entered into the active court record, established without ambiguity what my relationship to the Enfield estate was. Gordon Price sent a letter to Diana Cho on December 2nd, confirming that Frank and Lorraine's estate documents had been reviewed and updated to reflect the instrument, equal distribution, no distinction of origin. The same thing the agreement had said on March 7th, 1962. Lorraine called me on Sunday, November 26th, the Sunday before Thanksgiving. We spoke for 44 minutes, which was longer than we had spoken in years. She did not apologize in the way you expect an apology, directly, with the word itself, but she said things that lived in the same territory. She said she had not understood, in 1962, that the agreement meant what it meant. She said she had thought it was procedural. She said that keeping the adoption secret had felt, at the time, like protection. She said a lot of things that were true and that I had already known, and that needed to be said out loud anyway. I listened. I said very little. At the end of the call, she said, "Will you come for Thanksgiving?" I said yes. The Thanksgiving dinner on Sycamore Hill Drive was quiet in the way that things are quiet after realignment, not uncomfortable, but recalibrated. Frank carved the turkey. Lorraine made the same cranberry sauce she had made every year for 60 years. I sat in the chair I had always sat in. We talked about things that were not the document or the will or 1987 or any of it. We talked about the porch boards I had replaced in November and whether the stain had matched well enough in the rain. It had. It matched fine. Robert Enfield, 61 years old, and in possession, finally, of the name they gave me and what it was always supposed to mean. The maple in the backyard on Alder Creek Lane loses its leaf the same way every year. The gold ones first, then the orange, then the last stubborn few that hold on into December. Eleanor planted it in 1993. It is 30 years old. It does not know anything about adoption agreements or estate filings, or what 36 years of patience costs. It just keeps growing. That is the whole difference between a secret kept for your protection and the truth you were always owed. One of them eventually costs more than the other. The paperwork was filed in 1962. It just took 61 years to matter. If you were sitting in that Portland kitchen on a gray September Sunday in 2023, and your parents told you something they had kept for 6 decades, and you already knew, what would you have said first? Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. If you like this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being a part of this sphere.